I had to look at my watch to see what day it was. It's Thursday, the 23rd of July, 2020. I'm Pastor Ron Jetter, Immanuel Lutheran Church, with my daily message. Good morning to you. Boy, these hot days. We had 100 degrees a couple of days ago. I don't think it'll hit 100 again today, but wow. And it's nice being outside in the evenings when it cools off, but it's almost not even cooling off enough before the sun goes down. I've been looking at some of these great stories in Genesis, and I wanted to remind all of you that there's really two reasons that these stories exist. Number one is to help us understand their understanding, the ancient Hebrew understanding of the character of God. I had a professor back in seminary way back when, some 40 years ago, who said, remember the phrase, "Couldy woody diddy." That's right, "Couldy woody diddy." It's a cute little phrase that rolls off the tongue, but there's three questions to ask. Could God do this? Does God, in our understanding of who God is, have the ability to create the heavens and the earth and fashion them out of nothing, the sea, the sun, the stars, all including human beings? Could God do it? Number two, what is the character of God? What is God's intention? What is God's will? Would God do it? Would God choose to do this particular thing? And we've been looking the last couple of days, the story of the flood. Would God choose to wipe out every living creature on earth except for Noah, his family, and those animals that Noah had preserved? And then did God do this? Is there within the Hebrew scriptures and other writings historical record of God having acted in a certain way? That's really what the Tanakh, or Jewish Bible, is. It's the written record of the activities of God on behalf of humanity with whom God has chosen to be in relationship. Couldy woody diddy. Could God? Would God? Did God? The story of Noah, which we've been looking at for a couple of days, like other stories, is to answer certain questions. And that's the second thing we need to remember in all of these stories. These stories exist to explain something, explain the presence of work. Why do we toil for our living? Explain the ability of us to work and earn our daily living with plants and animals and other kinds of work. Explain the existence of hatred, of prejudice, of envy, of greed. Explain the existence of massive, catastrophic events such as the flood. Explain the survival of the human race against all odds. Things like this. And this section of Genesis is known as the primordial prologue. That is to say, primordial meaning before time, before human time begins counting. And yes, we can go back in the generations and say, okay, Methuselah lived this long, and Lamech lived this long, and Noah was 500 before he even had this vision from God, or the command from God to build the ark. Wow. At 64, I can barely keep up with my 7-year-old grandson. At 500, I can't imagine that I'm going to want to get out of bed in the morning, let alone build an ark. So how do we take these stories? Well, we look for truth. We don't necessarily need to look for fact in the story, but we need to look for truth. Couldy woody diddy. What is it telling us about the character of God, the historical record of God, the will of God, the ability of God, and our relationship with that God? So the primordial prologue is before we started counting time. What comes after the primordial prologue is the recording of specific covenants, and the covenant begins with Abraham. But we've already seen a pattern here emerging. There was blessing or grace given to Adam and Eve. Then there was sin, and there was judgment on sin, being kicked out of the garden. And then God gave them the ability to work with the soil, to earn a living, to have herd animals. So there's the grace. Well, there's the sin. Cain's offering was not accepted, Abel's offering was. And so Cain killed Abel. The judgment, Cain is banished from his people. But there's a grace. No one's allowed to harm Cain. And then we get sin again. The people are sinful. God judges them with the flood. The grace is that Noah and his family survived. Sin, judgment, grace. Sin, judgment, grace. And that's really a pattern that continues on into the life and times and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. I'm still in the story of Noah. It gives us a glimpse into their understanding of the cosmos. Again, we want to hearken back to Genesis chapter 1, when God said, I will establish a firmament and call it the sky, as if it was a glass dome protecting the earth. There was outside of that water. Underneath that water, that had explained them why water sometimes came down from the sky, because there was these things called the floodgates of heaven. They would open up and then water would come down, and then the floodgates would close and the rain would stop. That explained where rain came from. They didn't understand that evaporation occurred and then it came over from the seas to the land, rained, ran down in lakes, forests, and went back to the sea. They didn't understand that there was a fixed amount of water on the earth. They believed that water could come up from underneath. Well, we know that's true. Springs, wells. And so underneath this disc, this flat disc, was water. So they live in this flat disc protected by this glass bubble. And on this bubble, there was the greater light, the sun, and the little light, the moon, which traveled across. And there's, of course, the old joke. An ancient Hebrew once wondered, where does the sun go at night? It goes from east to west. And where does it go at night? Because in the next morning, it starts back in the east. And he decided he would stay up all night. And he couldn't figure it out, and he couldn't figure it out, and then it dawned on him. Okay, bad joke. But in the story of Noah, it says that the ark landed on Mount Ararat, but it wasn't until the 10th month of the first day that the tops of other mountains subsided. In other words, the story is that there was so much water that came down when the floodgates of heaven opened up, and heaven poured so much water onto the earth that gradually the level of water rose up until most of the mountaintops were gone. And there was nothing that Noah and his family could see on the horizons, nothing, until the waters finally receded and they saw Mount Ararat, specifically mentioned in chapter 8, verse 4. And then verse 5, the waters continued to abate until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains appeared. So the water, where's the water going? Well, it's being drained out through something. And they don't really explain where the water goes. But we know that there isn't a plastic dome over us, that there's actually nothing over us, that gravity keeps oxygen here, and that if you go on, that you get into inner space, near space, outer space, the other planets, the moon, and so on, that it is vacuous. It is not water. We know that rain comes, as I said, from evaporation, and that there's a fixed amount of water. There is no way there could ever be enough water on the earth for all of the mountains to disappear. The only way that could happen is if eventually all mountaintops eroded to the point where everything was below sea level, and then the sea would indeed cover the surface of the earth. But it would be the absence of mountains, and with things like Mount Everest at 29,000 feet, or even right over here that I can see outside my front door, Mount Rainier at 14,404 feet. It would take an awful lot of water to bring the sea level up to 14,000 feet. We pretty much have to double the amount of water on planet Earth. And so we know that this is their explanation that wouldn't last in the light of today's understanding. So we have to set aside, did it happen that way? And instead ask, what does it mean? How does it help us to understand our relationship with God? What their explanation is that God created a situation where Noah and his family were completely in a trust relationship with God. They're in a boat. They've got no way to add food to it. They're counting on the water subsiding so that they can then send the animals out Well, if everything on the earth has been destroyed, what are the animals going to eat? It's going to take a while for the grasses to come back. And again, we can't just throw our understanding into this. It just doesn't work that way. But finally it says, Noah sent out the dove with the dove looking for land, and the dove came back. The second time he sent it out with an olive leaf. So now there are olive trees on land. If every living thing on land was destroyed, where did the olive leaf come from? It came from an olive tree. But if everything was destroyed, where did the again, you can keep asking questions. The point is that the voyage is now over. And it said finally, so it's almost a year then that they've been on this boat with these animals. And that's the way the story is, that Noah and his family are called to preserve life, to start over, to wipe out evil with water, not fire, not ice, but water, and start over. And so now we've got a promise of a brand new life, humanity without sin. Well, we'll see about that. I'll see you tomorrow.